Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 77 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right, I am here remotely with Alyza Bohbot James of City Girl Coffee. Ironically, one of the few people in the coffee industry that shares a somewhat similar beginning before the coffee industry, in the fact that you were also a salesperson for Boston Beer Company. So oddly specific similarity to your start. But outside of that, I think you have one of the more unique coffee stories of, I don't think anybody I've met has the same coffee story, how they got into coffee, but your story with Alakef and your parents launching City Girl, how that all went down. Excited to have you here today and go through that full story. I should also mention
excited to be here.
I should also mention right at the beginning, the new City Girl Empower Hour, your brand new podcast has started. So I wanted to plug that at the beginning before we get distracted, which is very easy for me to do. But let's start all the way at the beginning.
Yeah.
I guess with you, it really would begin in your childhood because of your parents and the coffee background. So let's go all the way back to the beginning of coffee in your life.
Let's go all the way back to the beginning of time. No, I'm just kidding. It was a snowy day and I was born. No, I'm kidding. My parents started Alakef Coffee Roasters when I was 5. And it's kind of a long story, but I always like to say my dad was born in Morocco. My mom was born in Florida, and they met and married in Israel, and then naturally ended up in Duluth, Minnesota in 1983.
Yeah, that would be the first place that I would guess is Duluth, Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always like, I do a lot of speaking gigs, and I'm always like, no questions, nothing further. Like that's super normal. But my dad, the company really started from my dad's passion for the search for the perfect cup, because he, is from Morocco, spent a good chunk of his life in Europe, and so is really used to this more robust European style of coffee. And, as you can imagine, in the early 1980s, mid 1980s even, specialty coffee was not super abundant in northern Minnesota. I mean, certainly there were some roasters in the Minneapolis-St. Paul markets who were well on their way into the specialty coffee movement, and no doubt on the East and the West Coast for sure, but not in northern Minnesota. And so he just, really wanted something to drink in the morning. So my mom bought him a small little coffee roaster and some green coffee beans, and he just started roasting in our kitchen for his own consumption. And so would start to give it to friends and to neighbors, and people would taste it and were like, wow, this is like nothing I've ever had before, right? Because they were used to just your kind of gas station church coffee that was pretty thin, or, you put cream and sugar in it, whatever. And so they said, you should start a coffee roasting business. And my mom's background is in audiology, speech pathology. At the time, my dad was teaching at a Montessori school. And they were like, yeah, neither of us have a business background. Let's definitely start a coffee roasting company. Like, we have no money, we have no experience, we're in our 40s, like we should definitely do that. But they did. I mean, and so, they put a business plan together and went to the bank, and bank looked at them and thought they were nuts, but said, hey, if you're willing to mortgage your house, here's a loan for $20,000, go start a business. And so 1990, Alakef Coffee Roasters was born. And that name came from, people often ask, like, what is that name? Is that like your last name, or what is that name? And it's an Israeli Hebrew slang term meaning the best, or hits the spot. So like on the kibbutz where they met, they would say, Alakef, like that's the best, it hits the spot. So that's where the name came from. And fortunately for us, they were just on the right side of the specialty coffee movement.
Definitely, because thinking about the mid 80s, I mean, Starbucks really is like late 70s, and then early 80s started to kind of have growth on the West Coast. So at that period, especially in northern Minnesota, I would have to imagine competition was pretty non-existent when you're talking actual specialty coffee, where you're not having to load it up with cream or sugar, or just like you said, gas station coffee. How was it received? How was your parents' coffee received when they launched Alakef?
Well, it's funny. I remember my dad telling a story about, he went to one of the grocery store chains in town, and went to go ask them for some space on the shelves. And they said, well, why are we going to pay this much? Because that guy down the street, is charging me this much for their coffee. And my dad said, well, first and foremost, we're sourcing the top 5% of specialty grade from around the world. But secondarily, I believe that my employees have a right to healthcare and to fair wages. And I build that into the cost of my coffee. And so if that, doesn't work for you, then thank you so much for your time, and I'll be on my way. And I think a lot of people really respected him for that.
He was so far ahead of the curve at coffee at the time. It reminds me a little bit of, I did like the Surly Brewery tour, and obviously you and I probably think a lot about beer industry and coffee and how they work together, but I did the Surly Brewery tour, and they said that when he went out and started to try to get on tap at places, that they were like, $150 for a keg of beer is ridiculous. This will never work. And now you look back and like 150 is like a super reasonably priced, kind of like low-end craft beer keg.
For sure. No doubt. I mean, I think, I think it was right at the time when people were becoming aware of what they were putting into their bodies, and they cared more about where it was coming from and what it tasted like. And coffee was not just fuel, right? I mean, you and I know this because of our background in our background in beer. But I think coffee has very much kind of gone through this transition over the years that beer went through, right? Where it was like, yeah, you went to a bar and it was Miller, Bud, and maybe one other thing, or even wine, right? Like you went to a restaurant and it was
red or
one
white.
Chardonnay. Yeah, right. Yeah, like one red, one white, and like a white Zinfandel, right? Or something. Yeah. It was like 3 options. And now you go and there's, 4 different Sauvignon Blancs or something,
tell you the
from
story
all these different regions.
They'll tell you the story of who the farmer is. This is the,
sure.
This is, pictures. Here's a little infographic. And so, so we don't spend too much of this episode on just Alakef, because I want to get to a lot of your story and what you're doing. How long because a lot of this is obviously going to be kind of your parents telling you the story. How long in their mind was it between that like really startup period where it's like trying to get on the shelf at the grocery store to where it's like the business it became, where it was self-sufficient and growing steadily?
Yeah, it was about 5 years. I really, it was really, within 5 years, they had grown the business into a place that was profitable. They were able to finally pay themselves, not a lot, but a little, right? I think as a business owners and entrepreneurs, like that's when you've made it, when you can pay yourself. It's about 5 years, and then just kind of kept growing, and obviously the specialty coffee movement just really built up around them within that 5-10 year period of time.
And growing up around it, what was your perception of Alakef and of the coffee business? Because it's funny talking to people, like my parents both owned businesses growing up as well, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's what they do, that's their job, like it's just like any other thing. Did you have an idea of what was happening, or how involved were you with the whole coffee scene at Alakef?
Well, I was aware that my parents did something, like made something, but I didn't really understand what it meant to own a business. Like I was 5 when they started the company. And so I just felt like, oh, that's what every kid does on the weekend. They go to coffee tastings or they go to coffee conventions. Like, no, that's not what every kid does on the weekend. It just was such a part of my upbringing. And when and I'm sure we'll get there, but when we talk about like what it was like for me to come back into the business eventually, that was part of it. I'm an only child. And so the business almost felt like my sibling, because it was just such a part of my childhood. Like on the weekends, my dad and mom would bring home bags to put labels on them. And so we would sit at the dining room table and my dad would be like, okay, no bubbles, you got to put it on really carefully. This is going to go to a customer. And then we would go to the cities, because at the time, a lot of our coffee shop customers were in the cities. And so every weekend we would spend kind of coming down here, and the original location of their roasting facility was next door to my dance studio. And so after dance class, I would just come next door and like run around. And it just kind of felt like a huge part of my childhood. So I didn't really think it was anything other than like, this is just what you do when you're a kid.
So let's fast forward. You're graduating high school. What are you kind of looking at your life? Do you have an idea of what you want to do? Is it involved in coffee, or are you trying to go off and do your own thing? At what point when you're graduating high school off to college are you kind of in the mindset of?
Well, I actually wanted to go to college for musical theater, or sorry, I have stopped this recording like 5 times.
I've got it on my end. It actually sounds really good. Okay. Yeah, I've got it. So we're all set.
I just accidentally like stopped it twice and I'm like, shit. Okay.
No, I've got it. We're all good.
All right, good. Sorry. You have to edit this out.
No, I leave everything in. It's fine.
Oh, good. Okay. Oh, good. No, actually, when I was graduating high school, I really wanted to go into musical theater or vocal jazz. And my senior year in high school, I got vocal nodules. And so I was actually auditioning for the musical theater program out at Syracuse. And I was in the middle of my singing audition. I was singing a song for Maida, and there was like a whole section of my range that I couldn't hit. Like all of these notes were just gone. And so I came back and had to see a vocal therapist and was diagnosed, and it was kind of a whole thing. But I knew that basically that was sort of the end of my singing career. Like I wasn't going to get into these music programs. And so I really had to pivot and think about what else I was passionate about. And at the time, like I loved Friends. I mean, I still do, but I looked at Rachel and this idea of being a buyer, and I was like, oh, I love to shop. I could totally do that. And Syracuse had a really great retail marketing management program. And so I switched my intended major and went to school to ideally become like a buyer, and then very quickly realized that it's not at all how they depict it on Friends. You spend a good chunk of your time like sitting at a desk doing math, spreadsheets, which is not my jam at all. But I stuck with the major because I loved the professors. It was a really small kind of cohort. And so I felt like I got a really good business background without having to necessarily be in the business school. But honestly, at no point between high school and even through college, at no point did I even really consider going into the business until kind of later, almost at the end of my college career, when I interned with my parents for a summer and kind of spent the majority of that summer really dreaming up the idea of having a retail storefront. So at this point, we had really always been a wholesale coffee, retailer. Yeah. And I'd always dreamt of having my own retail space. And so I had this idea, but I graduated college in 2008, which was like right at the height of the last recession. And my parents went, okay, not only is this not the right time for you to come back in and for us to invest in the company, we're lucky to just sort of be sustaining. But we also don't feel like it's good for you to come right from college into the business, because we don't ever want you to come to the business because you feel like either A, it's the easy thing for you to do, or B, because you think that's what we want you to do. If at some point in the future you want to come back into the business, we will, of course, welcome you with open arms, but we want it to be because you want to be in the business and you want to be coming back, not for any other reason. And so that's when I started interviewing with Sam Adams, and went, okay, I could sell beer. Like how hard could that be? And that's when I kind of went down that road.
Where were you a brewery rep for Boston Beer?
In Boston.
In Boston. Okay. I guess I didn't really know that. What was that like? Because I always thought that must be the hardest job, to sell Sam Adams in Boston, which seems counterintuitive. You're like, well, no, everybody wants it. And you're like, exactly, everybody already has it. How do you sell more Sam Adams?
It honestly, what's interesting that you say that, because I've often wondered, like, if I had been a Sam rep somewhere else, would I still be with the company? Because I think a couple things happened in Boston. Number one, we went through a couple of managers really quickly when I first came on, and that was really difficult. But then number two, everything always felt like a fire drill. Right? Like somebody important was coming into town, so you had to run around and make sure that your accounts were properly merchandised and that the kegs tasted appropriately, and and that you had the right glassware and the signage was up, and it just felt like everything was a fire drill all the time. And don't get me wrong, it was fantastic. It was like really fun to be single. I remember when I first moved there, And I was like trying to meet people, and I'd go to a bar and a guy would be like, yeah, what's your name? Like, what do you do? Not that interested. And I'd say, oh, I'm, Alyza, I work for Sam Adams. And their head would kind of turn like, oh, like all of a sudden they would get super interested. Like, oh, do you get like free product? And I will say, I'm so grateful for the time that I was at Boston Beer Company, because the investment that they make in their people from a training perspective, I got to imagine is unparalleled.
It's
like,
pretty incredible.
It's so incredible. Like the training and the knowledge that I walked away from that company with is like insane.
And that's because it's funny when I would tell people, oh yeah, I'm selling beer. It's kind of like, oh, so you're like chilling, or you're just, kind of just taking a fun thing. I'm like, this is a pretty intense training program. The sales like training you get every 3 months, being flown back and forth to go train, is pretty incredible. And I imagine your experience in Boston was a little different than my experience selling north of Chicago up to the border of Wisconsin, where Twisted Tea became a little bit more of the portfolio the farther north you go. But I had a lot of autonomy in what I was doing, and just going out and hitting bars, restaurants, grocery stores. But the sales training, it was honestly one of those things I think I realized even as it was happening, that you go, oh, this is like valuable, because that's the reason I took the job was I did an internship at Medtronic, and I knew I wanted to do sales or marketing. And they're like, if you're going to do sales or marketing, do sales first, because that will add to your marketing knowledge, whereas it might not work to do the vice versa. And I was like, what do I sell? And he's like, you're going to be 22. You're going to have no experience. Literally sell anything. And so when I found that job, I was like, let's go. And then all of a sudden the training, I go, oh, this is probably the best training a 22-year-old could get out of college for sales.
For sure. Hands down.
So you're in Boston for how long?
So I ended up being there for a total of 6 years. I worked for Sam Adams for just a little over 2. And it really became evident to me, like the first year I loved it, like straight out the gate, I kind of crushed it. And then year 2, again, we got this different manager, and it, because of the era when I started, there was, I think 7 of us in the area. And as people either left the company or got promoted, we didn't get replacement people. Our territories just got bigger. And so I just felt like really inefficient all the time. And just kind of became obvious to me that this wasn't my passion. This wasn't going to be what I wanted to do forever. And so at that point, I had a conversation with my parents of like, okay, if I'm not going to be here, but I am enjoying the kind of sales and business piece of this, like, do I want to come back into the company? Because then maybe I should go get my MBA. And at the time, like, I really still felt like coffee was my dad's thing or my parents' thing. Like, I didn't feel like that was a passion of mine. And I also felt really comfortable on the East Coast. And so the idea of moving back to Minnesota was honestly at the time sort of unappealing to me. Like, I felt really settled in Boston. And a friend of mine who actually had on the podcast early on, but a friend of mine was working at Boston College High School. She was like, you're kind of like always giving everyone in your life advice. Have you ever thought about being a high school guidance counselor? And so I interviewed their high school guidance counselor, and immediately I was like, oh yeah, this is totally what I want to do. Like, I want to work at a high school, and I want to help students, and I want to help people. And so I ended up leaving Sam Adams and going to get my master's in school counseling at UMass Boston. And so finished that program, again, with every intention of being a high school guidance counselor. But that summer, after I finished my program, my parents called me and said, okay, we totally respect what you want to do, and no pressure, and we're so proud of you and everything else. But we wanted to let you know we feel done with the business. We are ready to move on. And if you're not interested, no problem, but we are going to go and talk to a broker about selling the company. So we just really want to kind of check in with you and make sure, like, last call, you're not interested. And I remember I was sitting on the beach with one of my best girlfriends at the time. And I just remember this feeling in the pit of my stomach, like, that feels really wrong. Again, it comes back to how central the business was in my childhood. And it was like, you're going to sell it? Like, that just something internally just went off. And so I was coming back for, again, one of my other best girlfriends, she was getting married that summer. And so I was coming back, and her now husband picked me up at the airport, and we were driving up north to Duluth from the Twin Cities. And at the time he was working for General Mills, and we were just brainstorming. He was like, this is such a cool opportunity. And we were just brainstorming about what the company could be and what an opportunity, because I was 26 at the time. It's like, he's going, Alyza, what 26-year-old has the chance to take over a company that is profitable and, has a reputation like the one your company has, and everything about it, and a great product, and just think about what you could do and what you can make, and kind of where you could go. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. And so I came back to my parents. I said, listen, why don't you hold off on the broker? I will sublease my apartment in Boston. I'll move to Duluth for 6 months. You come and spend a good chunk of that with me. Teach me the pieces of the business that I hadn't previously been exposed to. And if I can see myself feeling passionate about this, and I can see myself doing this for the long haul, then as long as I can move to Minneapolis or St. Paul, as long as I can move to the bigger city, then I'm in. I think this could be a really great opportunity.
Well, I'm curious if part of it is that feeling that's, oh, this is my dad's thing, this is not my thing. And so you never even had the thought of being in it because you're like, this is not my thing, this is their thing. Yeah. Then all of a sudden it shifts to, oh my gosh, now it wouldn't be their thing or my thing, that it's almost like this feeling of like, one, obviously you want it to still be part of your life, and also that shift of, oh, it wouldn't be his thing, it would be my thing. Because that is something that is interesting. Of you hear the story of people joining family businesses, that dynamic can be very, very difficult. And so did that kind of play into your kind of paradigm shift of how you thought about Alakef and potentially coming back?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, my parents are so smart in the sense of they did not let me come back right away after college, because I think had I been given that opportunity, I might have, because my parents know me very well. I'm a very much believer in like work smarter, not harder. And had I was watching all my friends kind of struggle to find jobs in a recession. And had I been not even had to like go out and try to find something and just been given this opportunity, I probably would have taken it. And that would have been a really bad decision, because I don't think I would have had the same affection for it as when I kind of came to that decision on my own. But yeah, certainly it was like, it's not even that it's not his thing and now it's my thing, but it became sort of bigger than either of us. Like it transcended who had ownership, and it became about the legacy of this product and what it meant for the customers who had been with us for 25 years and the employees who had been with us for nearly the same amount of time. And we had kind of become this family, and this product meant something in our community, and it meant something to these people. And it was that for me, that was honestly, it was less about mine or yours. But I think what like catapulted or what propelled me sort of to say yes was this idea that it could be both, right? It could be theirs and I could honor this legacy, but also there would potentially be this opportunity for me to create my own thing and to kind of think about bridging the past with the future. But I didn't know what that would be.
Mm-hmm. You're subleasing your Boston apartment. You're back for 6 months. What happens in those 6 months that eventually leads to you coming back?
Well, a couple different things. So again, my parents came and spent a good chunk of the beginning with me. And a few things happened. One was, as I sort of sat back and kind of thought about my day and my future, and it was like, this company is really running on autopilot, because at that point we'd been in business 25 years. It was very profitable, it was sustainable. We knew what we were doing, and it was a well-oiled machine. And so at some point I was like, am I going to be really bored? Like, what do I do every day? Because this is kind of just humming on its own. And so that was sort of in the back of my mind. Right. And then the other piece was, as I started to go back out into the community and doing like demos and tastings for myself to kind of get reacquainted with the market and our customers and what have you, people would come up to me and say, oh, is this a new coffee company? I've never heard of this. And I'd say, no, we've been around since 1990. And so where can I find you? And I'd start listing off all of these cafes in the area, or, some of the local co-ops or whatever it is. And they're like, oh, I love that cafe. I go there all the time. I've been drinking your coffee for years. Like, we were almost the best kept secret of coffee in Minnesota, which is not totally what you want when you're, a business in a pretty saturated marketplace. And so when I started to kind of dig back into the history of the the company and realized, okay, we had this great period of growth, kind of happened very quickly. And then for the majority of the last better part of a decade, really, we've been super stagnant. Like we've really just been kind of hanging on, if anything, maybe slightly declining. And it was primarily because my parents just invested next to nothing in marketing, advertising, brand awareness, consumer buy-in, any of that, because in the beginning they didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
But now when I was coming back into the business, again, the marketplace had gotten incredibly saturated, and the things that once differentiated us, having fair trade, being one of the first roasters to certify organic, private label, roast to order, all of these, terminology, like, so what? Kind of everybody was doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to think about like, okay, if we're going to be here for not just the next, 5-10 years, but 25, 30, 40 and beyond, we've got a great opportunity to create something and differentiate it. And so that piece of my mind, that creative piece of like, what does this look like? That really excited me. And so that was sort of the catapult of, or the catalyst rather, of like me wanting to stay and continue to build something and to bring the company kind of into this next generation.
How quickly did the idea of City Girl come to you? How many iterations of the catalyst or moving forward or kind of shifting a different part of the business? How long from that 6-month period that you spent back home and decided that you wanted to be in this to the idea of City Girl and what it is today?
Well, I think so. I came back, it was fall of 2014. And then spring of 2015 is when I went to SCA in Seattle. And I attended the breakfast for the International Women's Coffee Alliance. And they were gearing up for their biannual conference in Colombia, where women from over 30 different countries come together. And it's just fantastic. But a gentleman there told a story about a husband and wife who were from Colombia. And because Colombia has been so war-torn, the husband had to go and fight in the war and was unfortunately killed. And the wife takes ownership of their farm. Key piece of their machinery breaks down. She goes to the banks and asks for a loan, and they refused it to her because she was a woman. So this story and this event happened right in the middle of me thinking, because I had no idea at that point what this looked like. This was just an idea at that point of, okay, I want to create something that's more representative of me. I want to create something that is more representative of kind of the next generation of coffee consumption. And then I go to this breakfast and I hear this story, and I was immediately moved because I had more or less grown up my entire life in the coffee industry and had no idea that this inequity existed. Right. And so then I started to really dig into what this meant for women to have access to finances, education, resources, fair marketplace, and the greater picture of what that meant for not just these women and their nuclear families, but for their surrounding communities around them was humongous. And so that was kind of my aha moment to say, okay, wait a minute, here's my opportunity to not only create something that is representative of me and my voice in this next generation of coffee consumers, but is incredibly meaningful and has great impact on the sustainability of our industry.
So you're at this conference, this strikes you. What are the next steps once you go, I've got the kind of core of this idea, what I want to focus on and start to build everything around? What are your next steps once you get back from that conference?
Yeah, I mean, I spent the rest of that conference almost giddy, like electrified, because I knew that this was just such a cool idea. And I started to think about what I wanted to call it and what I wanted it to look like. And I don't even really remember how I got to City Girl. I think I was just thinking like 2 words that sounded well together, or I was trying to think of like words that were like alliteration. I don't even really remember how I kind of got to City Girl, but I was like, oh, City Girl Coffee, like that's CC, like that's kind of cool. I don't know. It just really kind of hit me. And then a friend of mine locally had a really good friend who lives in California and does brand design. And so I sent her just like a vision board almost. And it was like modern badass meets glam, right? It was like kind of 50s glam meets modern badass, this idea of, I don't know, just like kind of old school, but fun and young. And so she sent me back like 8 different iterations of logos. And she was the one that actually came up with the scooter. And I was like, that is it. That's everything. That scooter embodies like everything I want this brand to look and feel like. And so we, came up with a logo and started working on some colors and some packaging schemes. And then, I went, okay, if we're going to do this, we need to hire a publicist, because it's great to have a brand, but if nobody knows who you are, like how are we going to get through the clutter or rise above the clutter, right? I mean, it's so,
yeah.
You go to a grocery store, I mean,
I can tell you
a
that.
million coffee packages. You know what I'm talking about,
yeah,
right?
me and Jeff had to go tell people.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? I was so fortunate to be in a business that allowed me to dream and to kind of invest in something new.
Yeah. And that's how much thought went into starting a separate brand, and how was that received by kind of the existing core family you were talking about of Alakef? How's the idea of launching another brand with a new vision received by the existing kind of team?
Well, I think it was received well because, we started to think about the logo and the packaging, but first and foremost, it came from the mission and how we were going to actually implement this. And the idea behind City Girl was that we were going to source exclusively from women-owned or managed farms and cooperatives from around the world. And then we were going to work with these organizations like Cafe Femenino, like IWCA, to try and give back in order to really, truly help these women have access to finances, resources, education, fair marketplace. And so I think because it was tied to this mission, it was really well received, because it was this idea of like, we're not just creating a new brand just to create it. Yes, I want to create something that is more representative of me, but the larger implication is that I want to create something that's really going to do good in this world, and that's going to help us create more sustainability. And for the whole tenure of our company, sustainability has been at the core of our values, both from how we source to what we put back and give to the environment, and what packaging we're using, and you name it. And so this idea that now we were taking sustainability beyond just what it means to kind of put back in terms of resources, but truly how we're going to support the whole supply chain. That idea was very well received.
And it's almost like the Alakef business, when you think about it, being around for 25 years on its own is an incredible accomplishment. And even when you say the last decade had been pretty stagnant, if it's on autopilot and not declining terribly, you go, that's a really solid core of a business. And there are certain times where you have to go, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And trying to tweak with something that is so just stable and strong over such a long period of time is pretty risky. And to try to pivot in a way with that existing core is like trying to move us, the old adage, like it's hard to turn a large boat or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so you almost created a way to be agile as a large existing business. So you have the advantage of existing resources in a core business where you're stable, but you can move quickly and introduce new ideas with City Girl. So you finalize the branding, you finalize the bags. How do you decide the go-to market strategy? Because I think you have a very unique go-to-market strategy within specialty coffee that you don't see a lot of high-end roasters doing. How did you decide your go-to-market strategy once everything was designed?
Yes. Again, we hired a publicist to really help us, and we did a launch party, and we partnered with Bright Pink Foundation, which really works to help women advocate for their own health. And my thought process behind that was, okay, if we have kind of an event, that event will help us to get the attention of some media kind of initially. It'll get our name out there. I'm always coming from a place of like, why would anybody care about this kind of thing? Like just launching a new coffee brand is maybe not intriguing of itself.
That, by the way, you'd be shocked how many people do not have that in mind. I think about that constantly. When I think about stuff, I go,
for sure, if
I wasn't doing this, would I care at all? Would I want to go to that thing?
Yeah. Like, is this newsworthy? Like, oh, this company that's been around for 25 years is launching a new brand. Like, okay, that's cool. But I didn't really know if that was going to be enough to, really excite anybody. And so I wanted to create an opportunity where we were raising money for a really great organization and do something that was kind of newsworthy. So we did that. And then we already had some distribution in like the local co-ops. And so we went to them first, and that was sort of an easy placement opportunity where we could at least say, okay, we're here. You can find us here at these couple of stores. And then we did,
and I imagine that was easy because that step, I think a lot of people as a brand new small business would be like, that seems incredibly challenging. But looking at the values and mission of what City Girl is, fair trade, organic, women owned. You look at the co-ops and what they're trying to do with their missions, and you go, those align perfectly. So I imagine that was probably. And
we already had great relationships with them, right? Like they had been selling Alakef for years and years and years, and so it was really easy. And that, in a sense, again, I don't take that for granted because that is a step that a lot of small businesses, like, they've got to find out who the buyer is, and we were able to just say, hey, we've had this great relationship with you. We're launching this new brand. Would you be willing to give us a little bit of space so that we could put it on the shelves? And for the most part, it's the
flywheel concept of like the flywheel is really difficult to start, but once it's spinning. And so you were able to kind of launch City Girl at a more advanced stage of the flywheel than a brand new business. But I always like to pause on moments like that, because I know, like, I am obviously much closer to that stage where I was like, how do I get in this one store? And to highlight that, you go, well, this is why that was easy, because the established relationships, the mission, the value of what you're doing. So you launch in those co-ops, you start getting in local stores before this event.
Yep. And then we were doing kind of micro events around town for the summer, right? Like 5Ks. I believe we did Grand Old Days that summer. And so we were able to get our name and our mission out and tell our story, because that was, for us, we knew going to be probably the most important thing, was to really get in front of consumers and tell our story so that they understood who we were, but more importantly, why we existed. And we then were approached and had an opportunity to purchase 10 billboards with Comcast. So, I believe they call poster billboards. It's the half size, right? So it's not the huge, massive ones, but it's the half size. So we had an opportunity to purchase 10 of those. And what we did was we had them pull 10 strategically located around Kowalski stores and Lunds and Barley's, because we knew that those were the two sort of bigger grocery stores in the metro area that we wanted to get into first and foremost. So that way, when we were able to get those meetings, we could go into those stores and meet with those buyers and say, we are so committed to creating consumer buy-in that we have strategically placed marketing in and around, right? So we feel so confident that if you bring us into our shelves, by the time the time that we get this set, the consumer will not only know who we are, but feel confident enough in purchasing. And so Kowalski's was the store that gave us our first break, so to speak. And I remember, we went in for the big meeting and we got all of the Kowalski's and we did all the sets ourselves, and super excited because Alakef had never been able to break into Kowalski's. And so I was like, oh my God, we accomplished something that as a company we've been trying to accomplish for a really long time. And about 3 months after we were on the shelf, I went back into all the stores and spoke with the store managers just to see how we were doing and really gauge kind of consumer buy-in and what have you. And I remember one of the buyers said, I'll be honest, you've got really nice packaging and I like the way the brand looks and, I like your story, but I was pretty skeptical that you were going to actually move any packages at this price point, with kind of what you've got going on, but we can't keep it on the shelf. And so for me, that was so validating to say, okay, we've got something that consumers really feel passionate about. We've got a great product, and it's not just because of the mission. It's not just because of, being woman owned or woman sourced, but it's because of that. And it's a good product and they're coming back, because that's the other piece is like, it's great to have a company with a mission, but if you don't have a solid product in that bag, it's a one and done kind of situation.
Yeah, when they go, you're on the shelf.
You know what I mean?
You're on the shelf. You must be excited. I go, I am more nervous than ever. Give me 1 month and I'll let you know if I'm actually not even, because then after 1 month, you're like, well, I mean, that's not long enough for somebody to buy the next bag. So give me 2 months. And then 2 months you go, well, is this rebuys or is this just all new customers? And then like 2 years and I'm like, I think we might have some repeat customers. And then 3 years, it's like, okay, I think we'll be okay at this store. So it is something that like everybody congratulates you up front and you're like, I'm not in the same mindset as you right now. So just like give me a little bit of time. So I'm sure getting that news was like, oh, okay. So everything I've been working on is validated at a store level.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's that sense of, you know, because the feedback kind of early on had been, it's a good idea, but I don't know if you want to have a brand with the name girl in it because it might alienate 50% of the population. And it's great to have a mission, but it's not enough to drive consumers. So you might be concerned at that price point that you're not really going to move. And so you just never know, right? And I was it's one thing to start a company, but in the back of my mind, not only was I starting a company and did I feel like I had something to prove, but I was also putting the reputation of everything my parents had built completely on the line. And it still feels that way today. Like this sense of not necessarily needing to prove myself anymore because I feel like I've done that, but really paying homage to the legacy. And it's not just a startup. Like it's, if this were to go south tomorrow, you know, it's not just me and my reputation, but it's this whole legacy of everything that we've built till now, you know?
Yeah. So you get this validation at store level. You see it starting to move. You're at Kowalski's. What are the next steps after that?
Well, I think the key is we have to think about how do we continue to grow in this market. For us, it had always been about kind of how do we get to Target. Target was a big kind of milestone for us, wanting to get that distribution. Whole Foods felt like another kind of milestone for us. And it just was really again about.
Are you going through a distributor at this point?
We were when we went to Lunds and Byerly's.
Okay.
Yeah. When we went to Lunds and Byerly's, then we started to work with the distributor.
And what was that transition like? Because that's what we're going through that right now. We just launched in January with the distributors. It was why I asked.
Okay. I mean, it's challenging, right? I mean, we've never, so fundamentally as a business, we've always, you know, any order comes in Monday through Thursday before 11:30. It's roasted the same day. It's packaged the same day. It's shipped out. The majority of our business up until this point had been independent coffee shop food service. So it was large package, you know, 3-5 pound packages being consumed pretty quickly. I mean, freshness has always been one of our, you know, another one of our kind of core beliefs and values. And so now as City Girl is starting to grow, it's totally shifting the way that we're doing business altogether because now more of the business is 12 ounce. And when you shift to the distributor, you know, it can be a couple months before the coffee even gets to the consumer from the point that it's roasted. And that was totally opposite of everything that we had ever known as a company. And so we really had to sort of shift our mindset about what freshness meant and what other steps we needed to take. I mean, people often ask about, you know, is your packaging biodegradable or recyclable? And our answer to this point has always been no, because for us, we still do everything very automated or, you know, by hand. It's not automated.
Yeah.
And so for us, we want to make sure that by the time the consumer gets the coffee, they're going to have the absolute best experience they possibly can, which for us means ensuring that there's going to be the best barrier to the coffee, right? So the barrier from oxygen, from light, from anything else. And so we haven't been able to move into that biodegradable or recyclable material yet, just because our system doesn't allow for it to ensure the freshness of it for that longevity period. But yeah, I mean, it was just a fundamental shift in having this kind of like almost like family-like relationship with our customers. And now when you're working through a distributor, you're just adding one more layer between you and the customer. Yeah. And I mean, that's just fundamentally a shift in how you do business.
And did it change how you sold to new customers? Because I'm sure just even knowing that there's a distributor in the middle changed approach of finding new customers and also being able to use them as a potential resource.
Yeah, I mean, it's just both. It's both such a positive, but it can also really be a negative too, right? I mean, you give up a little bit of your control. Your profitability certainly is impacted when there's kind of one more layer, but it creates some efficiencies. So yeah, it was sort of like, okay, in a sense, we've got a partner now we don't have to do all the legwork necessarily. We can lean on someone else to help us find those opportunities or utilize their relationships.
Yeah, because I mean, that even happened today as as I'm kind of learning the ins and outs. I worked with a bunch of distributors at Sam Adams, so I'm not unfamiliar with the world, but world of distributors. But even today I was like, hey, would love to go team sell this store with you. He's like, we're already in that store. I was like, oh, awesome. Like, I wonder when I would have found out about that versus, every store up to this point, every store we were in, I personally went in and sold it. And so that's like one of the benefits, but also it's kind of weird that you're like, oh, I don't even necessarily know what stores I'm in until I get a monthly report. So there's a lot of and looking at what you're doing and the way you're growing geographically, I'm sure like the distributor thing has become a big part of your world and managing that is the reason I ask.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be super honest. I mean, about 3 years ago, we hired a VP of sales who is phenomenal and has really been, I mean, I really owe him the credit when it relates to what we've been able to accomplish. And he really manages those relationships. So I mean, that's another thing where like you are so still closely tied to the sales piece of it. Mm-hmm. And because of the tenure of our company, I've been able to kind of hand that piece off, which has allowed me to sell in other arenas. But yeah, I mean, it's so again, there's like that piece of
I was about to say it's its own job, and I go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a good hire.
Yeah. I mean, but he spent the majority of his life in coffee at a different company, and so he had a lot of those relationships as well, and he's had a lot of experience managing those relationships with distributors, and I mean, he could probably tell you like it's almost a full-time job just managing that relationship, right? Yeah. Not even going out and finding new business on your own.
So you're getting into the local chains, you get into Lunds and Byerly's, you use the billboard strategy. How long are we talking in between like that first Kowalski's win to the chains to growing to like Target?
I think it was like 3 years from conception to, okay, we've got like a decent portfolio, we're in Target. I believe it was 3 or 4 years. Because we're about 5 years removed from the launch now, almost 6, I suppose. It was about 3 years.
And how far ahead are you planning kind of the strategy of how you're growing? Because that's something that obviously is like remains super fluid, especially after last year. But how are you kind of looking at the strategy of growth of City Girl? Is it something that you target specific like chains, or is it geographic growth? How do you look at where City Girl goes and how?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of have like a 3 or a 5 year and a 10-year strategy. And for us, it's really about regionality and national distributorship. But when we think about national, that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to be in every single Target. But for us, we think about, because we know that we just the nature of our brand, our messaging, our price point, we know that we do better in metro markets. So for us, we really think about, okay, what other metro markets from coast to coast can we infiltrate, and how are we going to do that in a way that, again, allows us to really communicate our messaging. So for me, it's less about this transactional relationship with consumers, but how do we get our customers to come on this journey and be a part of the movement to create sustainability and empower women of our industry. So for me, that's kind of how I think about it.
And one of the difficulties I would imagine, because this is something I've thought, if, just doing the thought experiment, so you go, if all my wildest dreams came true and this started happening years down the road, is marketing out of market. I think the City Girl brand, I imagine, would travel really well because it doesn't have that. There are a lot of brands that are tied very, very closely to their home, whether it be the name of the company's literally the city they're in or whatever it may be, that when you go out of market, I imagine marketing would get more difficult because you're not based out of there. You can't be super hands-on in person. Mm-hmm. How do you approach that in entering a new market? How do you not only get on the shelves, but how do you create the pull through at a market you've never sold to before?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and it's actually one we have been lucky enough to ask some other companies who have done it really successfully. We asked them, like, how did you do it, and what would you recommend doing as we move through this process? And the advice that we got was really to focus the effort at the point of purchase, right? Like they were like, don't spend money on like commercials, billboards. Once you're out of market, that's not going to make enough of an impact. Like focus your efforts at the point of purchase where you can actually have the buyer's attention and potentially influence their purchasing decision. And so that's what we really tried to do. I mean, yes, there's some strategic digital marketing. And for us, we think about, okay, once we've sort of potentially interacted with them at the point of purchase, then how do we re-interact with them? Right. So if we know they've been there, then how do we re-engage with them, and how do we kind of keep that conversation going so we can hopefully continue to influence that purchasing behavior, and tell the story. But again, it's all about telling the story. So things like shelf talkers, and for us too, it's really like what's on the packaging. I mean, it's something we're continuously thinking about, and we're even thinking about that now. Like, okay, do we need to do a new iteration of packaging so we can be really, sure about how we're conveying the messaging on our packaging, because you only have like 10 seconds or something, 5 seconds. I don't even know what the amount of time is, but you get such a short amount of time with every consumer. It's like, how do you make the most impact with them? And for us, it's like engaging with them through our packaging or through our messaging on the shelf.
So if you're using that Boston beer lingo, you're talking zone 1 is really important.
For sure. It's so funny that you say that. So before I hired our VP of sales, I, was handling the sales team. And I basically took like the profile sheet from Sam Adams and like reimagined it for Alakef with like the back, the back with billboard, basic pop.
Yeah.
And then it was like, none of your listeners are gonna be like, what are they talking about? But like, what I'm talking about. Yeah. So like zone 1, zone 2, right? And so I would tell my team, like, as we were doing, ride along days, I'd be like, all right, so let's look at zone 1 right now. Like, how could we improve zone 1? Right. And then we like go into the store and I'd be like, where could we put up a display? Like, how could you improve zone 2? It's,
I think I had it flipped. Zone, I might have been, I don't even know anymore. There are also like 9 more acronyms by the time I left that you'd be like, I don't know what that is.
I'm sure. As I remembered it, zone 1 was like the front of the store.
Yep, I had it flipped around. Zone 3 is what you're talking about, the point of purchase, where the actual purchasing is happening. Yeah. And then zone 2 would be like essentially the store, like any other, like the aisle or. Yeah. My big takeaway, and like, especially at retail locations, is the impulse purchaser. You go, if you as close as you can get to when they're making their decision. So when you think of a billboard, you go, I'm still minutes at the least. I'm minutes away from making my decision. When I'm outside the store, I'm getting pretty close to making my decision because I'm about to be in the store. But if you can be on that shelf when somebody's at the coffee section, looking at the coffees, deciding which one to get, is there something we can do that no one else is doing that's going to at least draw some eyes on it? And that's something that I don't think a lot of people focus on, because it is more challenging to get those. And it is something that a lot of the time you have to approach buyers with ideas, as opposed to, if you ask a lot of buyers, what do you do to promote? They're going to say, we do flyers, we do ads, here's how much it costs, here's what it is. Yeah. As opposed to, hey, I have this idea of, I saw this in a different store, or I saw this in a different market and it's working really well. Would you be open to that? And I think that's one of the ways that a small supplier can actually add value to buyers, is coming with those ideas that, quite frankly, a lot of large companies are like not that concerned with the point of purchase advertising, whereas small companies, if they can tell you're like placing the time to think about these things to improve their sales, I think that's a really valuable takeaway, is that point of purchase selling.
Well, and also comes back to, again, this is something I learned from Sam Adams, but what it means to be at eye level versus, the top shelf or the bottom shelf, and how much just by being at eye level, I think it increases sales by like 30% or something. You probably know that.
It's significant. Yeah. When we launched in Lunds, people were like, oh, so you're probably pumped. I was like, no one will know it's there for a while. And I was like, Jeff and I are going to have to tell everyone it's there, because the only way to see our coffee is if you were to be walking down the coffee aisle, you tripped, you happened to roll over on the side that Folly Coffee was, then you'd be introduced to our brand, which is like when you're small and scrapping, you go, we take it, and then we just have to prove that we deserve better shelf position. That's how we approached it.
Totally. Well, we did about a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it is, we rebranded Alakef, right? So now City Girl's kind of established, it's on its own, but now we kind of needed to turn back our attention to Alakef and think of how we were. So we thought about the packaging first and foremost, because it was a kind of one of the old like stand-up zippered pouches, which, because of the way that grocery stores have tried to pack even more on their shelves, only fit on the top shelf. And it was a beige packaging. So literally it just disappeared into the shelf. It only could sit on the top. And so we really had to think through like, okay, what do we want this packaging to look like? And we had to shift the size of it so that it could fit, just at eye level, like on a different shelf. I mean, all of those things that you never really had to think about, or some people just don't think are that important. But when you really look at the data and like boil it down, those are, they can make the difference between success and not.
And those are the things that when you're talking to buyers, if you have taken those things into account and you can kind of bring those up and say, hey, this is why our packaging is this way. This is why we designed it this way. This is, those are the types of things that buyers go, oh, okay, we're talking to someone who is like, they get what we're trying to do too. I think especially a lot of small businesses, they go, we're passionate about what we do, so you should care. And they're like,
yeah,
everyone we carry is passionate about what they do. Like,
for sure.
Why are you a fit for us? And that's why I think like the way you approach it is really unique, because your growth in specifically like grocery and retail is you are way ahead of specialty coffee and grocery. Like when I moved back to start Folly, that was one of the things I looked at. I go, there's like one, maybe two that I would consider to be specialty and grocery. And I was like, and City Girl is like the one constant. So I basically was looking at City Girl going, one of the like qualifying things of the store is if they carry City Girl, we at least have a chance to talk to them because they care about quality.
Yeah.
So that was like honestly
so
part
nice
of it.
Hear.
Yeah. And I mean, you just look
so
like
nice
the packaging and the billboard, and you can tell that when you look at it, you go, oh, okay. Like this is someone that's thinking about not just what does each individual bag look like, but how does it look on the shelf? What are we communicating? And that was honestly one of the big factors I would look at in looking at a set at a store. Is I go, okay, if they carry City Girl, then this could be a potential fit.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
I kind of want to end it on this point, because I think you made an interesting point early on that when you launched it, that like uncertainty that you got from people was, oh, is it a little too expensive? Oh, are you going too niche by having girl in the name? I go, for me, that shows if you're confident in the idea and like there's enough there to be confident about it, you go, that's probably a good sign. Because if you go to someone and they go, yeah, everything here makes sense, I've seen them and them doing it, so it must work, then you're just going after their business versus going out and making your own channel and making a new thing. It is inherently a bigger risk, but obviously it was very well thought out in the strategy, and also an awesome mission.
Yeah. I mean, well, for me though, it was like this kind of full circle moment, right? Because when it goes back to when I was sort of telling the story of people looking at my dad being like, you're crazy. Nobody is going to buy coffee at this price point. Like nobody cares about coffee. They put cream and sugar in it. But hey, if you're willing to mortgage your house, like here you go. Best of luck. I expect to get your house in 6 months. I was a broken record when I launched, because when we launched, especially in grocery, we were always the most expensive on the shelf, because I think we were $1 higher than even City Girl on the shelf. Yeah. And I was a broken record going around and be like, if you told someone 10 or 15 years ago that kids would be buying $10 4-packs of 16-ounce beers, they would tell you were on drugs. And I was like, now people are buying $20 bottles of beer. For sure. That's where coffee's going. And then people will go, okay, that's a pretty good point. And like, I was a broken record with that line just over and over and over, to be like, and then guess what? If it doesn't work, you're just going to send it back to me anyway. Well, the thing is, it's like, we're not trying to be everything for everyone, right? Like we know that our consumer, that they might not be, looking for the most expensive thing, but price is not a barrier to purchase for them, right? Like that is not their primary purchasing decision maker. So for us, we think about like our consumer is invested in the fact that we are certified women-owned business, that it's sourced by women, right? That they are having an impact, and or they just want something that feels different and young and fun and vibrant. Like those are all important factors, but we know we're not going to be everything for everybody, nor do I want to be, right? I think when you try to be everything to everybody, that's when you really get yourself into some trouble, because it's impossible.
The way I've put it is, the more people you try to please with what you're doing, the more resources you have to make it work. And so when you look at like Coke or Pepsi, you go, they're literally trying to get everybody to want to drink this. And that's why they're paying $1 million for a 30-second Super Bowl ad, is because you have to be constantly in front of people, constantly inundating them with your brand, with your, the whole thing. And versus finding a more niche audience that price isn't their number one factor. It's not something everybody's going to like, and they actually take pride in that. It's something they want to talk about. That's like that word of mouth marketing only happens if someone's excited. I'm not going to go tell anyone about Coke ever. Like, have you ever had this, or like, did you hear they released a new flavor? And then like, because they spent $50 million on the advertising for it, and it'll be gone in 3 months.
Right. I'll tell one funny story just on that note. So my husband is a lawyer, and a former colleague of his was on an airplane, and just randomly some other person on that plane was like, oh my God, I just found this coffee while I was here. It's amazing. You have to try it. It's called City Girl Coffee. And this friend of ours was like, hey, I know the owner of that company. And, he told me, I was like, that is so insane to me that some random person on a plane felt so passionately about our coffee that they were just telling another random person on a plane. Like, that was truly the moment that I felt like we had made it.
And you're like, we made it because that weird airplane person that talks to you loves our coffee. No, I know exactly what you mean. I remember the first time I got an order from someone I didn't know personally. I was like, we're real now.
For sure.
No, I really appreciate you coming on. I have always thought you've had. I should also mention now you're a new mom during all of this.
I am. Yeah.
So how's that going? How's balancing being a mom while also running really 2 businesses now?
Yeah. I mean, it's been great. Having your first kid during a pandemic was probably not how I would have dreamt it up, probably.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, that's not like how I had envisioned it my entire life, but I, again, am super fortunate. I was able to bring someone in. So we're an EOS company, for anyone who's familiar with that term, traction. And so we were able to bring in like a part-time or a fractional integrator. And truly that allowed me to step out of the business for like a solid 3 months, which was something that I recognize very few entrepreneurs get the opportunity to do. But if you do, I totally recommend it, because it really allowed me to like think on a high level about how I want to spend my time, what is meaningful to me, how to move forward. And it puts a lot of things into perspective, right? I think when you're a business owner, you can just get this tunnel vision of like everything matters and everything is life or death.
What?
And then
I've never felt that way ever.
Yeah. Like, I didn't get the sale, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
Right? And then you bring then you bring a little human into the world, and you're like, oh no, like this little thing could actually die. I have to, like, this is life or death.
Yeah, see, I can tell you which side of the line I'm on. I can tell you which side of the line I'm on, and that let's just say Saturday and Sunday was awake until I went to bed, all business. And then I was like, what did I just do all weekend?
yeah, right. So it just gave me this perspective of kind of really in life, and that on top of just everything that happened last year in 2020 of like, we are not guaranteed tomorrow. And so I think just those things combined just gave me such a unique perspective to say it's all going to be okay. And at the end of the day, all we can do is our best, and all we can do is to try to improve or to leave this world a little bit better than we left it. And if we do that, then I'm good. right? Like at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
I think there is no better way to end this episode than that right there. I will end it like I end every other one and say, have a nice day.